She traveled across the country with a heart full of hope and hands that had never been held. But when she stepped down from the train, the man who promised to marry her took one look and walked away without a word. Her name was Temperance Willow Hargrove, but folks back home just called her Temmy. She had soft, round cheeks like apple dumplings and hair the color of rich cinnamon bark. Temmy's eyes were warm and brown, like the earth after rain, but most people never looked long enough to notice. They stopped at her size, not her smile. She was bigger than most women, broad in the shoulders, full through the waist, strong in the arms from years of work on her daddy's farm. But no one ever called her beautiful, at least not where she could hear. Temmy had answered an ad in the back of the westbound Christian Courier. A widowed rancher from Montana Territory was looking for a God-fearing woman to raise his 2 young children and share a quiet life of faith and farming. She spent nights sewing a new dress from faded blue calico and paid her last coins to get a bonnet that matched. When she mailed her photo, it was from the shoulders up. She didn't lie. But she also didn't explain. The train pulled into Dry Creek Junction with a loud hiss and a swirl of dust. Temmy stepped down, gripping her worn carpet bag and squinting into the sun. A man stood by the fence with a wide-brimmed hat and a beard like river moss. 2 children, 1 girl, 1 boy, clung to his sides. That had to be him. Elias McCrae, the man from the letters. He looked her way. She smiled shyly and gave a small wave. Elias stared. His eyes slid from her face to her figure. Something in his shoulders changed. Temmy's smile faltered. He tipped his hat but didn't move forward. Then he turned. Without a word, he took the children by the hands and walked away. The little girl looked back over her shoulder with big gray eyes full of confusion. Temmy stood still as the wind tugged at her skirt. Her hands clutched the bag to her chest like it might hold her breaking heart together. She heard the voices around her, porters shouting, wheels clattering, but all she could feel was that hollow ache in her chest, the one she thought she'd left behind in Missouri. She waited. For 10 minutes. Then 30. Then an hour. No one came. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the empty platform. Still no wagon, no letter, no welcome. The only sound was a loose sign swinging overhead, creaking in the wind. Temmy finally turned and walked into town, her legs shaking under her and the hem of her dress dragging through the dust. At Miss Delaney's boarding house, the landlady gave her a room and a biscuit with barely a glance. "He didn't show?" she asked, not unkindly. Temmy nodded, silent. She couldn't trust her voice not to crack. "Well," Miss Delaney said softly, "you can stay here for the night. God doesn't always take us where we planned, but He takes us where we're needed." Temmy sat on the bed that night, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. She just stared out the window, wondering why God had brought her here, so far from home, so full of hope, only to be left again. But what she didn't know was that the man who walked away was about to lose everything. And she was the angel God had already sent to save him. Sometimes the ones we turn away are the very ones we'll cry out for when trouble comes. And that night the storm didn't knock, it tore the door off its hinges. The town of Dry Creek was small, just a strip of weather-beaten buildings, a church with a crooked steeple and dust thick enough to steal your shoes. Temmy had never felt so far from home. She stayed quiet at Miss Delaney's that day, folding her dress carefully over the chair and sitting by the window. Outside the wind blew strange. It was warm but sharp, like something wild was coming. Even the horses in the street looked restless. By evening the clouds rolled in low and fast. Thunder rumbled like a growl beneath the ground. Temmy laid out her Bible, the one her mama gave her before she passed, and tried to read. But her eyes kept drifting toward the window. And her thoughts? They kept drifting to Elias McCrae. She wasn't angry. Not truly. Disappointed? Yes. Hurt? More than she could say. But somewhere deep inside she understood. Folks didn't always see past what the world called too much. Too big. Too soft. Too strong. Temmy had lived with it all her life. Still, she'd seen something in his eyes right before he turned, a flicker of sorrow. Like maybe he was just as broken as she was. The rain came down hard after supper. Miss Delaney lit candles and clucked her tongue about the wind. Temmy barely slept that night. Half a mile out of town, Elias sat by his dying fire, staring into the dark. The children, Addie and Micah, were curled under blankets in the loft above. He could hear Addie coughing again. It had been weeks now. Her chest rattled like a loose wheel. He hadn't meant to be cruel. He just panicked. He expected someone smaller. Someone prettier. Someone who wouldn't remind him of the wife he lost. Lydia, thin as a fence rail and always fading. But maybe that was the problem. Lydia had faded too much. Faded right out of this world. He hadn't meant to send the new woman away. But once he turned, he didn't know how to turn back. Now the wind screamed through the trees, and the roof groaned above them. A loud crack shook the cabin. Lightning split the sky. Then came a sound that made Elias's heart stop. Micah yelling, "Pa! Addie can't breathe." Elias scrambled up the ladder, nearly slipping on the rungs. Addie was sweating, her face pale, lips tinged blue. The cough was deeper now, wet and choking. He lifted her into his arms. "It's okay, baby. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. He didn't know what to do. Temmy had just finished praying when someone pounded on the boarding house door. Miss Delaney was already halfway to the front with her robe tied crooked. "Is there a doctor in town?" a man shouted through the storm. Temmy recognized the voice. Even soaked in fear and rain, it was him. She stepped into the hallway just as Miss Delaney opened the door. There stood Elias, drenched and wide-eyed, holding a little girl limp against his chest. "I need help," he breathed. "Please?" Temmy didn't hesitate. She grabbed a shawl and followed him out into the storm. That night, the wind howled and the rain beat down. But inside that cabin, something sacred began. A woman once rejected knelt beside a sick child, wiped her brow, and prayed over her like she was her own. And the man who had walked away stood in silence, watching a kindness he never knew he needed. Sometimes healing doesn't come in silence. It comes through hands that stay, eyes that weep, and prayers whispered even when no one else believes they'll work. The little cabin was quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the labored breathing of the child. The rain still knocked on the windows like a visitor begging to come in, but inside, the room was warm with flickering light. Temmy knelt beside Addie, the frail girl wrapped in blankets, her skin hot to the touch. Her small chest rose and fell too fast, and every cough shook her like a leaf in the wind. Temmy didn't say much. She just worked. She dipped a cloth into cool water and wiped Addie's face gently, then turned to Elias. "Do you have onions? Mustard? Maybe some vinegar?" He blinked, confused. "For medicine?" "For a poultice. My mama used it on me when I was a girl and burning with fever. It draws out the heat." He didn't argue. He just nodded and went digging through the pantry. Micah, Addie's younger brother, sat in the corner wide-eyed, watching every move Temmy made. He didn't speak, but after a while he brought her the Bible that was sitting on the shelf. "Will you read to her?" he whispered. Temmy smiled softly and opened it with careful hands. She read Psalm 23 out loud, slow and steady, even when her voice trembled. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Addie's little hand twitched. Her breathing eased just a bit. Temmy looked up and found Elias watching her, not just with surprise but something deeper. Something that looked like guilt. He cleared his throat. You didn't have to come." She looked at him, not unkindly. "I know," she said. "But I did." That night, Temmy sat beside Addie's bed while Elias sat across the room, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. "I was scared," he said at last. "When I saw you at the train station, I thought you looked strong. And I didn't want strong." Temmy didn't flinch. He kept talking as if he couldn't stop now. "I married a woman once who broke like glass. She was gentle, sweet. But sickness took her and I couldn't stop it. So I thought maybe if I married someone delicate, I wouldn't feel guilty again. I was wrong." Temmy looked down at her thick hands. "My mama used to say strong women are like the beams in a barn," she said quietly. "They may not be pretty to look at, but they're the reason the roof don't fall in." The fever broke near dawn. Addie's skin cooled. Her breathing slowed. And when the first gray light touched the windows, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Mama?" Temmy leaned close and smiled. "I'm not your mama, sweetheart. But I'm here." Addie blinked, too weak to speak again, and drifted back to sleep. Elias wiped his face with his hand. His eyes were red. "You saved her," he whispered. Temmy shook her head. "God did. I just stayed long enough to see him do it." That morning the storm passed. The sun rose. And for the first time since she stepped off that train, Temperance Hargrove didn't feel like a stranger anymore. She felt needed. She felt like maybe she was where she was always meant to be. It's a beautiful thing when someone who was once turned away is finally invited in, not just through the door but into the heart of a family. Temmy didn't mean to stay long. She had only come to help the child, to do what she believed God would have wanted. But when morning came and Addie opened her eyes with a weak smile, Elias looked at Temmy and said, almost too quiet to hear, "Please, stay." So she did. The next few days passed slow and quiet. Addie rested in bed while Temmy brewed teas and fed her broth with a spoon. Elias worked in the barn but came in often, always asking if the girl needed anything, or if Temmy needed anything. Micah followed Temmy around like a small, silent shadow. At first he wouldn't speak. But on the third day, as she was peeling potatoes, he brought her a small wildflower from the yard and laid it on the table without a word. Temmy's heart ached with a warm kind of sorrow. These children had been through so much loss. They didn't need another goodbye. That evening she cooked dinner, real dinner. Fried salt pork, biscuits with butter, and sweet carrot stew just like her mama used to make. The smell filled the little cabin warm and rich. When Elias stepped inside he paused, surprised. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. Temmy wiped her hands on her apron. "I know. But I wanted to. It feels good to feed people." He looked down, quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Come sit," he said. Temmy hesitated. "You want me at the table?" He looked up quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I do." They sat together, just the four of them, Temmy, Elias, Addie, and Micah, around a wooden table that had seen better days. The candle flickered, and for a moment, everything felt still. Addie, though still weak, whispered, "Miss Temmy? Can you say the blessing?" Temmy folded her hands, tears stinging behind her eyes. She hadn't been asked to bless a meal since her daddy passed. She bowed her head and spoke slow. "Lord, thank you for food and family. Thank you for healing. And thank you for second chances. Amen." When she looked up, Elias was watching her again. But this time he didn't look away. That night, Temmy stood outside under the stars. The Montana sky stretched wide above her, full of silver light. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, if this is where you want me, I'll stay." Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Elias stepped out, rubbing the back of his neck. "Temmy," he said softly, "I owe you more than I can say." She turned. He looked nervous. "I was wrong that day at the train. I judged you without knowing you. And now I don't know what we would have done without you." Temmy's voice was gentle. "It's all right, Elias. You were grieving." "I still am," he said. "But maybe we don't have to grieve alone anymore." They stood in silence after that, under the stars, two hearts beginning to understand what it might feel like to trust again. Sometimes it's the small moments, a borrowed ribbon, a song in the air, that open a heart wider than any grand gesture ever could. The days grew warmer. The snow that once clung to the ground had melted into soft mud, and the trees around the cabin began to bloom in little green buds. Life was coming back to the land, and to the people living on it. Temmy woke early each morning to bake fresh bread. She hummed old hymns while she worked, and soon Micah started humming with her. Addie was gaining strength, walking with help, her little hand in Temmy's. One afternoon, as Temmy was sewing by the window, Addie spoke softly from the cot. "Miss Temmy, do you have a dress you love best?" Temmy smiled and set her needle down. "I used to," she said. "A sky blue one. My mama sewed it for me when I turned 16. "Where is it now?" Temmy chuckled. "Oh, honey, I outgrew that dress a long time ago. Gave it to my cousin's girl." Addie's forehead wrinkled. "But don't you want a dress that makes you feel pretty?" Temmy's hands went still in her lap. She looked at the little girl's big eyes. "Sometimes," Temmy said quietly. "But sometimes I just want to feel seen." That Sunday, Elias came in from town carrying a brown package. He set it on the table and looked at Temmy without a word. She opened it slowly. Inside was a simple cotton dress, the color of a pale summer sky. Blue, just like the one she'd spoken about. Temmy covered her mouth. "I asked the general store lady to help pick it out," Elias said gruffly. "Hope it fits." Temmy nodded, blinking fast. "It's beautiful." Addie clapped. "Wear it to the church social." Temmy looked at Elias. He gave a small shrug, almost shy. "There's a barn dance after the service next Sunday. You should come." Temmy hadn't danced in years. But something in her chest flickered. Hope, maybe. That Sunday came like a warm breeze. Temmy stood in the blue dress, hands trembling as she fixed her hair. Miss Delaney had given her a ribbon to match, and Addie had insisted on pinning a little flower on her sleeve. When she stepped outside, Elias looked up from the wagon and froze. Temmy's heart raced. "You clean up all right," he said with a half-smile. Temmy laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long while. They rode into town, the children giggling in the back, and after the church service the barn doors opened wide. Fiddles played. Lanterns swung from the beams. Folks danced and laughed, boots stomping the wooden floor. Temmy sat near the wall at first, watching. But then Elias came over and held out his hand. She hesitated. "I don't dance much," she said. "Me neither," he replied. "We'll wobble together." So they did. Temmy's cheeks flushed as he led her around the floor. She felt her skirt swish, her feet move steady. She wasn't light, but she was graceful. Elias leaned close and whispered, "You make the room feel warmer." She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. But he smiled like he meant it. And her heart, slow and careful, began to believe it. That night, as the wagon rolled home under the stars, Temmy looked at Elias and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me." He looked at her for a long time. "I wish I'd seen you sooner." The real storms aren't always the ones that roll through the sky. Sometimes they're the fears inside us, waiting to be stilled by a quiet word or a kind touch. The dance was over. The dress was folded carefully and set in the wooden chest beside the bed. But the feeling Temmy had that night, the feeling of being wanted, of being beautiful, still clung to her like the soft scent of lavender soap. The children were stronger now. Addie could walk all the way to the garden without help, and Micah had started talking more, even laughing. Temmy woke each day before the sun, humming old songs as she baked biscuits and fed the hens. She didn't ask if she was staying, no one asked her to leave. And that said enough. But spring brought more than flowers. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled down from the hills like spilled ink. The wind picked up, whistling through the trees. Temmy stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, watching the sky. Elias stepped out beside her, brow furrowed. "That storm's coming fast," he said. "I need to check the animals. You get the kids inside and latch the windows." Temmy nodded, heart thudding. She had seen bad storms back home. One had torn the roof right off her neighbor's barn. She ran inside and closed every shutter tight. She pulled Addie and Micah close and wrapped them in blankets near the fireplace. The wind howled. Rain slammed the roof like fists. But Temmy stayed calm. She told the children stories, funny ones from her childhood, and when they grew tired, she sang to them, her voice low and warm. Elias returned soaked through, hair dripping, shirt clinging to his arms. He looked shaken. "The barn roof's holding," he said, sitting down by the fire. "But barely." He looked at Temmy and the children curled up beside her, and his face softened. "You kept them safe," he said quietly. Temmy looked up. "That's what mamas do." The storm passed after midnight. When the sun rose the next morning, the land looked bruised, branches torn, puddles deep, but the cabin stood strong. Temmy stepped outside into the wet morning air, took a deep breath and smiled. Elias came out behind her. "I fixed the roof," he said. She looked at him. "And I'm fixing something else," he added. "Something I broke." Temmy tilted her head. "I judged you before I knew your heart," Elias said. "I didn't think you were what I wanted. But now, I think maybe you're what we need." Temmy's breath caught. The wind stirred her dress. The wet grass shimmered in the sun. "I'm not perfect," she said softly. "Neither am I." There was a long silence. Then Elias took a step closer. "You said mamas keep kids safe. Well, they've never slept better than when you're near. And I haven't either." Temmy didn't know what to say. But she felt something shift deep in her. A quiet peace like the kind that comes after a storm. Some words are too big for the mouth, but the eyes, they say everything. And sometimes, love begins in silence. Spring turned to summer. The fields were green again, and the hens clucked happily in the yard. Addie ran barefoot through the tall grass, chasing Micah, who had finally learned how to laugh out loud. The cabin felt different now. Full. Not just with people, but with warmth and bread and prayer and peace. Temmy didn't sleep in the wagon anymore. She had a room now, one Elias had cleaned out and fixed up just for her. He even built her a shelf to keep her Bible and her sewing box. Each morning they all sat at the table together, Temmy, Elias, Addie, and Micah. And each night they prayed together by the fire. Elias still hadn't said the words. But he looked at Temmy like he wanted to. One Sunday afternoon after church, Elias and Temmy sat on the porch while the children napped. The air was soft and golden. Birds chirped in the trees. Elias held a small wooden box in his hand. He kept turning it over, running his thumb along the smooth edges. Temmy watched him, waiting. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about how things started." Temmy nodded, quiet. "I was angry. Broken. I didn't want anyone here. Especially not someone I thought I didn't choose." She smiled softly. "And now?" He looked at her, really looked. "I thank God every day you came." He opened the little box. Inside was a thin silver ring. Nothing fancy. Just plain, clean, and honest. Temmy's eyes filled with tears. I can't say it right," Elias stammered. "I don't got fancy words. But I know this. I want you here, Temmy. I want you with me. With us. Every day." She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, the one holding the ring, and closed his fingers around it. "You don't have to ask out loud," she whispered. "I already said yes, with everything I've done since I got here." Elias swallowed hard. Then he smiled, slow and wide. They didn't make a big announcement. But that night at supper, Elias bowed his head and added something new to the prayer. "Lord," he said, "thank you for sending Temmy even when I didn't know I needed her. Make me a good husband and a better father. Amen." Micah looked up, eyes wide. Addie clapped her hands. "We're a real family now." Temmy laughed through her tears. "Yes," she thought. "Yes, we are. Just when life feels steady, the past can knock again. But when love is real, no wind can shake its roots." The days moved gentle, like the lazy river behind the field. Temmy filled them with baking, singing, reading the Bible aloud with Addie, and watching Elias hammer nails on the new chicken coop. Life on the ranch had changed. It felt like a home now, not just a place to live. But peace has a way of being tested. It came one morning like a shadow. Temmy was gathering eggs when she saw him. A man. Standing near the fence by the front pasture. Tall. Thin. Dusty clothes. And eyes too sharp to be friendly. Temmy stood still, heart beating fast. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped toward the gate. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice calm. The man looked her over slowly, like he was weighing something in his mind. "This Thatcher place?" Temmy nodded. "Yes, it is." He leaned on the fence. "I heard there was a woman living here now. Heard she came on a train. Said she was a mail-order bride." Temmy's hands tightened at her sides. "That woman is me," she said softly. "And you are?" The man smirked. "Name's Colby. Used to ride through these parts with Elias years back. Heard he had a bride. Wanted to see for myself." Just then Elias appeared, walking fast from the barn, eyes locked on Colby. "Leave?" Elias said. His voice was low but firm as stone. Colby raised an eyebrow. "Ain't no harm in looking." Elias stepped between him and Temmy. "I said, leave." Colby chuckled and tipped his hat. "You got soft, Elias. Didn't think you had it in you, settling down with a big woman and 2 orphans." Temmy flinched. But Elias didn't. He stood tall, jaw tight. "She's worth 10 of you, Colby. And those kids, they're mine now. You show up again, it won't be words I'm throwing the." Colby's smile dropped. He turned and walked off, kicking dust as he went. Temmy watched until the man was gone, then turned to Elias. "You knew him?" "Once," Elias said, sighing. "We both ran wild when we were younger. I changed. He didn't." Temmy looked at the sky. It was bright again. But her heart still beat fast. "Do you think he'll come back?" Elias looked at her with quiet fire. "Let him try." Then he reached for her hand. "You're safe here, Temmy. I promise." She didn't answer with words. But she held his hand tightly, trusting him with everything. That night, Elias stood watch on the porch, rifle across his lap. And Temmy sat inside, rocking Addie to sleep, whispering soft prayers that no man could steal what God himself had started. Sometimes the past doesn't knock, it breaks down the door. But love built on truth can never be torn apart. The summer days rolled on, but something hung in the air, like a warning in the wind. Temmy could feel it. Elias could feel it too. He kept the rifle close now. At night he double-checked the locks. The children noticed but didn't ask. They trusted that Mama Temmy and Papa Elias would keep them safe. But hearts can still whisper fear, even in a quiet house. One hot afternoon, Temmy was pulling laundry off the line when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Fast ones. She looked up and saw a cloud of dust coming down the trail. A horse. A rider. And her stomach dropped when she saw who it was. Colby. He didn't slow down. He charged into the yard, jumped off the horse and grabbed Elias by the collar right in front of the barn. "You think you can toss me aside?" he spat. "You think you can call me nothing in front of her?" Temmy ran forward, fear knotting her chest. Elias didn't hit back. He stood still. "Come. Let go, Colby," he said. But Colby didn't. He pulled out a knife. And then everything happened fast. Temmy screamed. The children ran outside. Addie clutched her doll, eyes wide. Elias stepped back, trying to shield Temmy. But Colby raised the knife high. And that's when Temmy did something no one expected. She stepped in front of Elias. Right between him and the blade. "No," she cried, her arms wide. "You want to hurt someone, you'll have to hurt me first." Colby froze. The knife trembled in his hand. "You do that?" he growled. "For him?" Temmy's voice didn't shake. "For my family." There was silence. Even the wind held its breath. Then Colby laughed, low and bitter. "You're crazy," he said. "Big and crazy." But he lowered the knife. He turned, spat on the ground, mounted his horse. "You'll regret picking her, Elias," he called. "Mark my words." And then he was gone. The world was still. Elias looked at Temmy with eyes full of something deep. He reached out and touched her face like it was something precious. "You stood between me and a blade," he whispered. Temmy smiled. "You would have done the same." He didn't answer. He kissed her instead. Slow. Sure. In front of the children and the sky and the whole world. And the children cheered. Addie spun in the grass. Micah clapped and shouted, "Kiss her again." They laughed. And Temmy, who had once been sent away, who had once hidden her tears in a wagon, felt like she had just stepped into the sun. The trouble was gone. But something else had come in its place. Something stronger than fear. Stronger than any blade. Something called love. She came as a stranger, was nearly sent away, but now, beneath the wide sky, she was the heart of a family. The willow tree at the edge of the field had always stood alone. Tall, graceful, quiet. Much like Temmy when she first arrived. But today the tree would hold something sacred, something long waited for. The day was bright, not too hot. The kind of day where the birds don't just sing, they rejoice. Temmy wore a pale blue dress stitched by her own hands. Addie had made her a crown of wildflowers. Micah stood proud beside Elias, holding the ring. Elias wore a fresh white shirt, his beard trimmed neat. He looked at Temmy like she was the first sunrise after a long storm. They didn't invite many folks. Just a few from town. The pastor. And God. They spoke simple vows. "I take you as you are," Elias said. "Not for who I hope to find, but for the woman I now thank heaven for every day." Temmy smiled through tears. "I never thought I'd be wanted," she whispered. "But God knew I belonged. And you gave me a home." They kissed under the willow tree. And the breeze clapped through the leaves like heaven's applause. Later there was pie. Laughter. Music played on a harmonica by a boy from town. The children danced in circles, their bare feet kicking up dust. The grave that once haunted the yard? It was still there. But now it sat beneath a cross Elias carved himself. On it he had written, "From sorrow came grace." Temmy placed a flower there that evening. Not out of sadness but thanks. That night, as the stars blinked overhead, Elias and Temmy sat on the porch, side by side, rocking slow. "You still think I'm too much?" she asked, teasing. He looked over and smiled. "Too much love. Too much strength. Too much heart?" "Yes, ma'am. And I'll take every bit of it." She laughed. Micah was already asleep inside. Addie too curled with her doll. The ranch was quiet. But not empty. Never again. Dear listener, if this story touched your heart, if you believed in Temmy's strength, in Elias's change, and in the power of love that heals, then don't leave just yet. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next tale of grace, grit, and good old-fashioned faith under the western sky. There are more stories waiting to be told. More hearts to heal. And maybe, just maybe, your story is next. God bless you and thank you for watching.